The troop turned and marched on quietly, reassuming the pace and format of the beginning of the day's journey. Zeke stayed closer this time, and all three men worked the same side of the river. Knees began to quiver while stepping down over rocks. The scenery had changed dramatically beyond the large falls at the end of the hallway. No more sheer cliffs shooting straight up at or near the water's edge. Instead, the rocky borders of the river were only about 20 feet high, then transitioned to steep soil-covered slopes, supporting all manner of mountainous foliage. There were plenty of insects, the dreaded horseflies, wasps, mosquitoes, and dragonflies. Birds could be seen and heard again. There were large and small animal droppings on the trail. It was like stepping out of a disconcerting dream back into reality. A clearing on the opposite bank looked to have been an old campsite. It was level and covered with sand. It stood about 15 feet above the water. It had a protective overhang of rock in back and a leafy tree in front that provided shade for the entire flat area. "Let's check that out," Carl said, pointing across the river. "It doesn't look like anybody's used it for several years," Devin said. The troop carefully crossed the river on a series of protruding rocks without stepping in water and worked their way up to the camp. Lodged in the rocks and sand were several old cast-iron pots and remnants of tools. "Check this out," Rich called to the others, pointing to the remains of a wooden sluice box. The wood of the sluice box was a weathered, worn white color. Its metal corners were pitted and rusted. It was partially buried in the sand and rocks. A rusted shovel head, with no handle, lay on its side, half buried a few feet away. There were indications of black smoke stains on the rock washed away by the years. It was evidence of a long-running campfire nestled under the rock overhang. A pitted 12-inch cast-iron skillet set in the hollow of the long-abandoned campfire. "This camp hasn't been used in 100 years, Devin said as he ran his hand over the charred rock face. "At least 100 years, Rich said. "Look at this old bottle I found," Carl said as he walked around the shade tree. "There's a bunch of old cans and bottles over there. I think it was their dump." The bottle was dark brown and had no numbers or letters imprinted on its sides or bottom. It was smooth with a large head and looked handmade. Rich and Devin couldn't muster the interest to investigate the junk pile. They started back towards the river. "Should I take it?" Carl asked Devin. "If you want to carry it," replied Devin. "What are you going to carry it in? You can't put it in your pocket, and I'm not carrying it." Carl dropped the bottle in the sand, and the troop walked back down to the river crossing, in the same place they had before. No one turned to look back at the camp as it fell out of sight behind them. The sun beat down heavy on the troop. Sweat ran freely as they stepped over the big rocks at the river's edge, marching on. From time to time, they made their way up above the rocky riverbed and through the dusty soil and pine needles under the trees. The heat slowed them. The heat pushed down on them. Dragonflies hovered near the water. Horseflies hunted above the soft dirt. Mosquitoes formed thick clouds, parting, then following the troop as they passed by. They marched on and on. Devin pushed a branch away as he stepped over a rock sticking out of the dust. He could see a camp just ahead. This was not an old abandoned camp like the last one. This was a modern camp with plastic water jugs neatly set in a row. Devin stopped and raised his fist next to his head to indicate to Rich and Carl to stop behind him. Devin let the branch sag back to its place, covering him from view of the camp, then turned to Rich. "There's an active camp ahead. Let's go back a way and cross the river, then pass higher up so we don't scare anyone if they see us." Carl came up near Devin and Rich to hear the conversation. Zeke sat down next to Carl. Rich pushed the branch to see the camp, then motioned with his hand to go back. They walked back about 100 yards, crossed the river, then made their way up the hill 50 feet or so. They tried to maintain their distance from the river for a while to ensure not to surprise anyone. They found an animal trail running parallel to the river in the tree line and followed it downriver. The ridge tops on either side of the river were tapering more and more as they worked their way downriver. Long Canyon would run into the Rubicon River soon. The ridge tops were only a couple 100 feet above the river as they moved on. Pop, pop, pop! A muffled sound of gunfire erupted in the near distance. The troop froze in their tracks. Slowly, each man lowered himself to the ground while nervously scanning the surroundings. Devin grimaced as he rolled over onto his back and positioned the Tech-9 up the trail. He reached one arm around and fumbled in the pocket of his field pants for a couple of extra clips. "Hang on, that may not have been gunfire," Rich whispered to Devin forcefully. Devin pushed his extended first finger to his lips. One of the clips Devin had placed beside him began to slip down the dusty trail and rapidly accelerated toward the river. It skipped over a rock and rattled into the rocks at the side of the river. Boom, 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 boom! It sounded like a rapid-fire cannon. Shots rang out from the opposite side of the river, slamming into the rocks that the clip skipped over. Rocks splintered and exploded. The bullets slapped through the tree leaves below them. One bullet slammed into a tree trunk near Rich with a tremendous thud. Rich, Devin, and Carl each scampered to curl up behind trees, trying to become as small as they could. Devin, with his back to the tree, held the barrel of the Tech-9 straight up and in front of him with one hand. The other hand firmly gripped the loose clip, full of glistening bullets ready to go. They sat there motionless, sweating hard, hearts pounding, and dry-mouthed for several minutes. Their ears strained to detect the slightest noise above the rushing water below. Crackling leaves and snapping twigs rapidly came closer. Devin lowered his weapon into firing position in the direction of the sounds, eyes wide open, daring not to breathe. The sound was coming straight down, from above their position, not from where the gunfire came. Rich adjusted his position around the tree and pulled out his pistol. Carl rustled to his feet and began running back down the trail they had just traversed. The rustling in the brush started after Carl. All went quiet again. Moments passed. Rich and Devin looked over to each other from time to time as they scanned the brush around them. A scream went out in the distance. Rich and Devin repositioned themselves, pushing hard against the trees. Devin kept at the ready with the gun. Unconcealed footsteps were heard coming towards them. The tendons at the back of Devin and Rich's necks were tight as piano wire. Their nostrils sucked in the gritty dust. Gun barrels aimed straight down the trail. "It's me," Carl said as he came up the trail with Zeke, wagging his tail beside him. Devin smeared the dust and sweat from his brow with his wrist, grasping the clips. Devin strained in a whisper to Carl. "No, those guys bolted over the hill. I saw them when I was crossing the river," Carl replied. "How many?" Rich said as he stood up. "Which hill did they go over? Who screamed?" Devin interrupted while staying in position behind the tree. "On the other side of the river," Carl answered Devin, then turned to Rich and said, "I saw 3. There could have been more." "Who screamed?" asked Devin again as he got up and looked around while he reinserted the loose clips into his pocket. "That damn dog is supposed to warn us of this sort of thing. Where the hell was he? Leave the dog alone." "I'd say he's paid for his trip going over the falls," Rich barked at Devin. "Zeke ran up and knocked me over. Did I scream?" Carl paused and then suggested, "Maybe we should stay in the tree line until we get to the Rubicon." "No way," Devin said. "No more surprises. They shot at us because we surprised them." "I thought you said they would kill us for our gold." "We don't even have any gold. We lost it in the deep part of the river," Carl said. "If they saw us sneaking through the trees while they were dredging, they probably thought we were here to kill them for their gold," Devin said. "From now on, we stay visible and announce our presence. Let's get back down to the river." Devin followed the steep path the clip took down to the water and searched for it in the rocks. Rich, Carl, and Zeke followed quietly while scanning the area for any reason to duck and cover. The hair on the back of their necks stood up as they crossed the river. Someone was watching them. The water was only a couple of inches deep and spread out across a 50-foot-wide bed of mildly undulating tailings. They were relatively level as opposed to piled in great heaps. The tailings were the result of large-scale dredging operation that had obviously gone on a season or more in the past. The main flow of water ran along the north side of the river in a self-carved trough about 5 feet wide and 2.5 feet deep. There were several split boulder remnants protruding from the tailings scattered in the riverbed. There was no doubt that some explosives had been used to break the large rocks. "I didn't see any scorching on any of these rocks," Devin said, pointing at several broken boulders at the side of the river. "They probably didn't use dynamite." "You think they used wedges and hammers?" asked Rich. "That would have taken months." "No, they used explosives. These rocks were too large to split by hand. Dynamite throws fire everywhere and leaves some scorching," Devin replied. "I wonder what kind of explosives they used." The walking was much easier in the man-modified riverbed. Most of the large boulders had been blown into smaller fragments. The sand and small rocks filled in to a smooth beach-like appearance. The troop carefully crossed the scattered equipment that the people left behind. An awkward, eerie feeling remained with the troop as they walked on shouting, "We're just passing through!" "They're out there looking at us," Carl said in a hushed tone. "I can feel it." Each man continually scanned the surroundings like mice crossing a hawk's hunting ground. Rich pointed at the cleared spot on the slope as he turned and asked Carl, "Is that where they went over the hill?" "Yeah, that's it." "It looks like they've been using that trail for a long time," Devin said to Rich. "The river bends around here. That trail looks like it shortcuts the route over the end of the ridge." The intersecting ridges indicated that the canyon they had been traversing since the sun rose was coming to an end and emptying into a much larger one a few hundred yards ahead. "I thought you wanted to stay in the river so we don't surprise anyone," Carl asked. "I think we have to use the well-worn path to not surprise anyone. Until now, that was the river, but this trail looks like the best bet now," Devin said, looking at Rich. "I agree. Let's go over the hill." Zeke ran out ahead along the path as the troop turned up it. Devin continued to call out ahead the warning, "We're just passing through." Devin's shoulders, back, and chest seemed to glow red with sunburn. As they topped the ridge, the Rubicon River could be seen for the first time. The Rubicon was more than 200 feet wide as it ran in a northwesterly direction. The river was flat and the water was, for the most part, only inches deep over the softball-sized smooth rocks. Deeper sections appeared here and there, with a small 10-foot wide stream snaking along the river's course. The ridges on both sides of the Rubicon River rose more than 2,000 feet in a lush, evergreen, tree-covered carpet.